ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you back to the Exceptional Conservative Show live from the nation's capital, where we are not ashamed at all of the good news conservatism, but it's the power of liberation, first to the Republican and then to the tyrants out there. I want to introduce, as some present to others, a young woman who is fighting the good fight to end communism in Guyana. She is none other than Onique Persaud. Ms. Persaud, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I got to ask you here, how did I do with my particular interview with the parliamentary member, Onique Schumann?
I believe you actually had some excellent questions. Can you hear me, actually?
Okay, there we go.
Okay, is that better? Can you hear me?
That's much better.
Okay, let's try this a little bit better. Okay. So yeah, I think you have some excellent questions from, especially in regards to communism.
Well, thank you. In the idealisms.
One of the things that.
Yes,
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, in the ideals that are being expressed, they seem kind of winsome in the sense that you're waiting for a communist government to end communism. Does that make sense to you?
No.
Okay.
No. So this is one of the things that he needs to keep in mind in terms of what we have going on in Guyana. Basically, he's saying that, in a way, he's kind of saying that there's not really communism in Guyana. But let's take a look at who owns all of the economic resources in Guyana.
Yes.
The state does. So what does that make you? A communist nation. Mm-hmm. Correct?
That's correct.
They need to focus more on individual, owned and operated some of these major resources, private citizens, and not the government. Let's take, for instance, the sugar estate. They're all owned and operated by the government.
Yeah.
The mining industry is somewhat privatized, but the bulk of it is given to Onique.
You know, the resources seem to be things that people appreciate more than their individual freedom. Is that because they have spent years under the dominance of the PNC and the PPP?
I think you have a good point. I think you might be onto something there. Yes, exactly.
Because the state seems to value the resources but not the people. I want to ask you, in the case of Berbice, there were
let's take the Amerindian society, for instance, seeing that you have Schumann on here. For instance, let's look at just that segment of our society.
Yes.
Article 149 says that the government is supposed to, they're obligated to protect the indigenous people, right?
Yes.
Their cultural way of life. Their language, for instance, is not being taught. Their language is disappearing slowly and slowly. Yes. How are they preserving their culture when that's actually happening in Guyana?
Yeah.
This is something based, this is just their language. There's enough native people there that can teach that language in the school to the natives.
Now,
it wouldn't cost a lot to do something. Now look at this. They give them 30,000 stipend for the chief. Schumann can attest to that because that's what he used to do prior to what he's doing now.
Yes.
What can 30,000 Guyana do for those people a month? 30,000 Guyana. I mean, the exchange rate, it's 2 something to 1.
Exactly.
200 and something Guyana dollars to one US. That's 30,000 Guyana dollars I'm speaking about.
Exactly. So about $1,500 a month is given to the indigenous people, while their resources are being taken out for large profits by groups from China, from Russia, and from other nations.
Let's look at land title. You know, it's really important that these people have land title to the lands that they're occupying right now.
Yes.
And each government that goes into power, you know, when they're on the campaign trail, oh yeah, we're going to do this. But then once they're back in parliament again, they forget about it.
Exactly. Is there a disconnect between the people and the elites that are ruling them?
The disconnect with the elite, with the indigenous people, or with
The common people in general.
disconnect with them and the government, yes.
Okay.
And that's because okay. Take me for example. Okay,
Yes.
my father used to own and operate a food and manufacturing company in Guyana.
Hmm.
He became a millionaire at 25 because he got the GDF contract to provide a survival pack. And how did he get it? From a friend. A friend knows this person, whatever. So that's kind of how business is done in Guyana. It's what private company knows who in government.
Hmm.
If you look at a lot of the private company, they have direct relations with whoever is in power at that point in time.
You know, it seems a bit ominous that there are individuals who wake up every morning with a fresh idea from the Lord, and they want to use resources to build their own company and hire their own people and make their own wealth, and take care of their families and the poor amongst them. And yet they're told every single day, don't do that, the state will do it for you. What does that eventually create on the streets of Georgetown and Berbice?
Don't do it, the state will do it for you.
Yes.
So again, let's go back to my father. When he started his company, there was ban on certain products. For instance, anything that was imported, let's say like Jello.
Yes.
They had a ban on that. They had a ban on any flour. They had a flour. This is during the Burnham administration. They had a ban on flour, split peas, etc. Right?
Yes.
So a lot of food manufacturers start to substitute some of the products that was made with these ingredients. And then, you know, let's say like shake and bake, for instance, you need, you know, flour to go into the mixture. So because my father was friends with the government, he was able to bring the product in, backtrack through Suriname, and the police literally would let it go.
Mm.
There's been instance where he was stopped. Well, not him, people that work with him, they would stop, and all they had to do is make a phone call to my dad. My dad make a phone call to Duncan Clark, and everything is all okay. The boat goes with the product. So these business people work hand in hand with the government, so they really don't have a voice, because then the government sabotaged their business.
Exactly.
Just like they do in Russia, just like they do in China, just like they do in Iran.
Exactly. There seems to be a misunderstanding of capitalism amongst the Guyanese people, including the deputy speaker. When you say capitalism, Onique, what exactly is capitalism?
Are you referring to what is capitalism in Guyana
No,
specifically?
no, in reality, what is capitalism?
Well, I can give you a couple description of what it is.
Yes.
and kind of related to Guyana. So, for instance, number one, in a capitalist society, individuals have a right to, like we spoke about previously on the show, liberty,
Mm-hmm.
free will to do as they please, kind of like breaking it down to layman terms.
Yes.
In Guyana, there's not necessarily such thing in terms of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
The freedom that you have in Guyana is what the government allows you to have. Um, Recently, we had a case in Guyana where someone was killed via um, one of the APNU individual
Mm-hmm.
literally hit this one Guyana's national cyclist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he got out of those charges because he's in government. Now, if it was the other way around, where it was a common citizen, that person would have went to jail, correct?
Yes, exactly.
But because this man who commit this crime is part of the government, he went off scot-free,
Wow.
right?
Yeah,
So for me, that's corruption, right?
exactly.
And in most communist society, that's the kind of things that happen. In the U.S., if that person was tried here, it would be harder for him to get off like that.
Exactly.
Does that
Exactly.
make sense? And like
Exactly.
I mentioned earlier, a communist society, the government owns all the economic resources. In terms of, um, market, we had talked about this before, about the market economy with business, where you had mentioned that in terms of allowing the people to, like the farmers, for instance, to
Yes.
be able to, negotiate their own deals, etc. Do you recall you had mentioned that to me
Yes. Yes.
um, on the show? The
Exa-
Guyanese people necessarily, the Guyanese farmers don't have that ability.
yeah, and that's unfortunate because then you will have the deputy speaker say that the Chinese have the same capitalism we do, and that Guyana is moving towards the same capitalism that we have, and that's not the case at all. Farmers here make their own deals and they sell their own foods across the world and locally and regionally. And so there are many people who are missing out on profit and freedom and happiness because
Hmm.
they're depending on the state to define for them what is capitalism, what is socialism, and what is communism. And China and Iran and Russia have no concept of what capitalism is.
Well, I mean, you talked to Schumann, and as you were speaking to him, I mean, he made some valid points, but in regards to, for instance, when he was talking about the Constitution, in the American Constitution and how it was created, he kind of lost me there in terms of, you know, um,
Well, that was a statement to say that the Iroquois, the indigenous people, impacted the founding fathers in creating the U.S. Constitution, which they may or may not have, but there were 60 men in a room in Philadelphia that said, we have got to make certain that our people are free and that we have a strong government. And that's how the Constitution was created, and later on the Bill of Rights added. But only the amendments added more liberty and freedom. I don't see Guyana depending on the government to give them more liberty and freedom. So, what will the people eventually do when they realize that their government is taking 80% of the oil money and using it for themselves?
so I'm going to answer that question, but I kind of want to answer what you had asked me originally in terms of capitalism, right?
Yes.
So I think capitalism is the ability to walk through any door that you see. achieve as high as you want to. The previous speaker, he said that capitalism is not good because you have rich and poor, and that's a misconception of what it can do. In other words, he was talking about people like Jeff Bezos and all these
Yeah.
other guys that have all these, you know, mass amount of money, and the smaller guys don't have anything, right? That's what
Yes.
he's basically saying. And to me, that's a misconception. In communism, socialism, there's still rich and poor, and there's no chance for a poor person to achieve. In capitalism, the poor can rise up, they can take themselves out of poverty if they choose to do so. In Guyana, when, you know, a lot of people in Guyana don't have that choice. In America, you can come here like I did with nothing and work your way up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't need any. I don't know anybody in politics here in the government. You know, I didn't have to get to know anybody in my local government so I can start a company.
Yes.
In Guyana, it's kind of like that. You have to know somebody to be able to, you know, get anywhere.
Exactly.
And you have to know somebody in the government.
Well, for those people
And to me, that's not fair.
for those people who are watching in Guyana tonight, or whenever they watch this video tape, I want to ask you, first and foremost, is the state producing an environment where the people will eventually seek to overthrow it? Number one. And number two, how can people pursue liberty and freedom in a state so static and so communistic?
Well, you know, Guyanese would never try to overthrow the government. They're not that. They're very passive in terms of something like that.
Yes.
However, I think that if we educate the Guyanese people on, like, you know, the Constitution and how it works for them and how it doesn't, if we educate them about the style of governance that they've gone through, you know, from, you know, the British to Chetty Jagan to Burnham, etc., they will see that they have, as a citizen, they have a responsibility to make sure that this style of governance stop, and they get a chance to vote every 4 or 5 years, so they can make those choices then based on, you know, making sure that whomever they put in power, number one, will keep their promise, and indeed rewrite, you know, fix the Constitution to benefit the people, number one. Number two, in terms of the state resources, they need to make sure that the government is not the only, you know, they need to privatize them.
Yes. Exactly. Onique, we love you and we appreciate you so much for what you do for ending communism in Guyana. They can find you on Facebook, End Communism in Guyana. We want to wish you the very merriest of Christmases and the happiest of New Year's. We'll see you in the new year. Thank you, Onique.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, listen, we got to take a commercial break. When we come back, hopefully we'll be talking with Janice Hall, the J Hall World Report, and as well talking about the COVID-19 bill that Donald Trump will have to allow to either expire or veto on his desk, because he is not going to give billions of dollars to Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these other great nations for gender studies. Just not going to do it. Listen, we'll be back right after this.